Hey folks, welcome back. Hope you're doing well out there. So in today's video, we're going to be doing something a little bit different, a little bit of a different approach, a different tone. I'm in a little bit of a dark mood today. The weather's kind of gloomy outside the window here. And I've just recently gone through some stuff that's kind of stirred up a theme, a big, deep, universal theme. Quite honestly, one of my core struggles and issues I've been working on that I want to share with you here. And this is the question of how do we operate in a bad faith world, quite frankly, in a world in which there are layers and layers of bad faith relationships and systems, as a good faith person who is coming from a healthy, healed, authentic, clear place in yourself. This for me has been a very deep struggle and a very deep question, and I think kind of represents part of the dark side of personal development. So if this kind of question interests you, if you're interested in the dark side of personal development, if you want to know a little bit more about this question of being a good faith person in a bad faith situation, or if you're just kind of curious about my own personal struggle with this, please join me for this conversation. Okay, so off the bat here, I want to be really clear that part of the reason I'm making this video, sure, is to kind of share perhaps some of my own personal demons and struggles here with you, to be a little transparent, and to perhaps share some of the recent stuff I've been through as an illustration of that. But, more deeply, I just, like I said, went through some stuff, and it really illustrated this deeper theme that I've been struggling with for a long time. And it's a theme that's come up with a bunch of my clients. This is, quite frankly, a piece of the puzzle here that we really need to reconcile and resolve as we grow, as we heal, as we level up and transform. And so I'm making this video not only to capture kind of my own thoughts and feelings about it and coach from an authentic place of my own struggles and kind of seeing some of the darkness in the world, but also because if you don't know to be looking for this or thinking about this, or if you don't have the language for this or the framework for this, this can be a very heavy, dark thing that can be very confusing and can really kind of keep a person stuck. And so I want to start to name this. And this is part of a whole side of what I think of as this conversation of, self-actualization and personal development and spiritual awakening and healing and all of that. There's a whole side to this, kind of multifaceted jewel, if you want to think of it that way, that is kind of the dark side. And when I think of the dark side of personal development, I don't just mean evil or selfish or malevolent, but also dark as in deep, as in shadow material, as in challenging, as in the nuanced complexity of the reality of life. I really think life is both incredibly beautiful and incredibly heavenly and exquisite and profound and truly sacred. And at the same time, part of that is that there's a whole dimension of darkness and challenge and pain and struggle and suffering and shadow aspects of human nature that are involved in being a human being, right? So this conversation today is a bit of a representation of that darker side, right? Kind of taking advantage of what I've gone through recently. And honestly, the weather is kind of cloudy. I'm a little feeling dark. So this felt appropriate. So that's the context here. So I want to add just a few kind of framing ideas, and then I'll share a story about a recent thing that I went through here, because it kind of illustrates this really beautifully. And then I want to kind of unpack what it means to be a good faith person. And, how do we move through the world as a good faith person in a bad faith environment, and, stay resourced? And what does that even mean to be in good faith or in bad faith? You might have a sense of that as I'm talking about it, but I want to kind of articulate that more clearly so that as a concept, you have this to start to work with, because it really helps to, I think, identify people who may be safe or who may be allies or may be helpful, or people who are perhaps toxic, unhealthy, not so trustworthy, et cetera, et cetera. We need to be able to identify, those who may harm us or damage us or, work against us, and those who are really on our side or healthy or potentially constructive to interact with. So, without further ado, let me dive into a bit of some of these introductory themes and frames here. I'll share a bit of a story, then we'll kind of unpack what it means to be a good faith person. So let's start. Okay, so like I said in the intro, and perhaps even said again redundantly in the kind of context that I just laid here, I really do think there's a dark side to personal development. It's just part of being a human being is dark, and part of being a human being is light. And it's really about the graceful union of that, the graceful integration of that, if you will. That's part of what makes for a whole, empowered, strong, healthy, adaptive person, in my personal opinion. Um, and so, as part of the dark side of personal development, this theme is a big one. Like I said, I struggled with it a lot myself, and I want to articulate it here with you so that you can start to think about it for yourself and start to, perhaps this is something you'll deal with down the line, or this is something that's already on the plate for you. Either way, it's a conversation I don't see being had a whole lot. So, part of the dark side of personal development is that as we wake up, as we become more just generally aware of our own psychology, of our own patterns, the patterns of those around us, of the patterns of the culture we live in and the global systems we are a part of, as we become aware of our own spiritual nature, as we become aware of our own potentials and capacities, as we become aware of our own limitations and challenges, right? As you increase in awareness and start to wake up, right, it's a really double-edged sword. There is a huge set of support and resources and gifts and empowerments and insights and wisdom and clarity and connection to that which helps you to thrive and have more well-being. That's all huge, right? That's all there. But simultaneously, there's also more awareness, not just of what's good or about yourself. There's more awareness as you get clearer with all this and more in touch with all of this of what is dysfunctional, right? Of what's not working and what doesn't work and what's toxic and what's unhealthy. And all of that becomes much clearer too. And this can be really like a very unsettling part of awakening is going, okay, yes, I'm clear with who I am and what I'm about and what my purpose is and my gifts and my capacities and what I care about, and my vision and my passion, like all that can like be super strong. But then you start going, right, okay, I'm also clear of my shadow side, or that I have a shadow side, of other people's shadow sides, of toxic relational dynamics, of dysfunction in the systems of our society, economic systems, health, blah 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 blah, right? We start to see much more clearly. And I'm of a generation where I spent a good chunk of my life before the internet really became the internet that we have now. So I can tell you there was a time where there was like talk and a sense of this, but something about the rise of the internet and the interconnectivity and the movement of information has also brought like a really sudden awareness of all the dysfunction going on in our society and within people really clearly and starkly to the forefront. So this is kind of more relevant than ever what I'm talking about here. As you heal and you make this distinction and you start to realize how what's possible for yourself and what's possible for humanity and the world and the gifts that await us, right? As you become aware of all of this, it also puts more pressure on you, right? And this is part of this dark side of personal development is you start to realize there are a lot of people who are not playing the same game that you are in terms of trying to be a healthy, whole, high functioning, positive, strong, well-honed human being. There are a lot of people out there who are not playing that game, right? Who are different flavors of low functioning, deceptive, manipulative, controlling, vindictive, sociopathic, narcissistic, blah, 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 right? Sorry to bum you out, but the list is very long and you start to become aware of this, right? And so the more you move into your own light, move into your own awareness, your own strength, the more there is pressure put on you, whether that's internal pressure of not wanting to add to the kind of pile of pain and suffering in the world, right? Whether that is about you realizing that perhaps you have to hold yourself up more, that some of the people you hoped would be support structures in your life aren't functional enough or healthy enough or good for you, and therefore you've got to do this on your own. there can be a pressure put on us, is my point here. And it can be really, it can weigh on you. You know, as much as you can like feel really well resourced, there can also be this like, well, damn, look around us. We got our work cut out for us. And you know, even if you're like more of an uplifter type personality where it's not just about your own well-being, but you really want to see humanity thrive, you know, help others grow, and you want to kind of, you know, be a positive force in the world, um, that can also create pressure for you because you're like, well, there is plenty to uplift. And there's plenty working against upliftment, we could say. Right. So this is part of this dark side of personal development that I'm talking about. Um, and, you know, part of that general distinction of thriving and well being versus dysfunction that we start to get much more clear about, you know, inside of that, there is a real deep question here. And like I said, this is something I struggled with for a long time. This is a personal pain point, or not really a demon in the sense of my own thing that I was acting out, but more a thing I struggled with in terms of it kind of demotivating me and kind of blackpilling me, right? And so this is something that I really struggled with for a long time. So here's the distinction. In the world around us and in the, you know, socioeconomic, you know, thing we live in, right? The system we live in and the set of relationships we live in, and in relationships in general, maybe that's the simplest way to frame this. There are kind of two modes of operation, right? Fundamentally, there are two modes of operation in relationships that make all the difference. And I think a lot of us are blind to this or confused about this. And this is a huge part of why some of this stuff continues to exist in the world. And the difference is that there are good faith relationships and there are bad faith relationships, right? And it took me a long time to wrap my head around this. But this is an important thing to understand, right? And for me, the struggle was, you know, realizing that I'm a person who's operating in good faith, right? Just to define these, we'll talk about it more later, but broadly speaking, you know, good faith is someone who is sincere, who's honest, whose motivations are transparent, who's kind of trying to operate probably from a win-win kind of perspective, who is doing what they say and meaning what they say, and generally, you know, making agreements that are upfront and honest and, you know, transparent and congruent, we could say. So, you know, a good faith person is trying to operate in the world in good faith, in an honest way that is transparent and clear and, you know, aligned, right? There are bad faith people who are not that, essentially, who will have covert agendas, who will have hidden desires, who will have you know, tendencies or intentions towards control or manipulation or getting what they want at all costs, or lying or making agreements that they don't intend to upkeep, et cetera, right? That's kind of a bad faith way of relating, right? There's so many flavors of bad faith relating. And you know, the thing about bad faith relating, we can unpack it, and there's a lot there to talk about. But the thing with bad faith relating is it's not just, you know, that it's person to person, right? It's also in social systems, like family systems can be bad faith, for example, or friend systems, you know, clusters of friends and the kind of dynamics that emerge out of a group of people that are a friend group. There can be bad faith stuff there. There can be bad faith stuff in the culture, right? For example, there may be, you know, real discrepancies, for example, with some of the cultural programming that we've grown up with, where there's like real double standards or real dishonest things, you know, and people might point to, say, traditional religions and the discrepancies in religion for that kind of a thing, or people might point to governmental systems and, you know, things, you know, stuff like that, right? So, or even like the discrepancy between the kind of messages about life that were given in movies and film and TV and media versus the reality of human nature and how we actually interact, right? There are a lot of these discrepancies that might not be accidental, that might be a little bit more by design or by intention, and might be ultimately bad faith. And I would say even if a discrepancy exists that creates a bad faith dynamic that is accidental, let's say, is just coincidental or accidental or unconscious. Part of what defines a good faith person is the accountability for a moment of acting out of alignment, or a discrepancy or dishonesty or some shadow piece coming up, taking ownership of that, being accountable for that, and doing whatever we can to bring that into good faith, right? Doing whatever we can to resolve that, right? A bad faith actor, by definition, would be someone who may or may not be aware, but doesn't care, won't fix it, is intent on that kind of dishonest signal, if that makes sense. So for me, there's been a huge struggle here in realizing that, the more I've awakened and healed, without being grandiose about that, I feel funny saying these things because there's an element of grandiosity to that. And I'm not trying to big up myself here, but as I progress as a human being, right? The more I've started to recognize, and this is different than projecting, started to really clearly recognize all of these different incidents of bad faith behavior, both in myself, to be honest here, but also largely in people around me, relationships around me, social systems around me, of course, our governments and the kind of macro, global stuff going on. There's so much bad faith stuff out there, right? Even just quite frankly, with like internet cyberbullying and the way people are to each other online, there's a lot of bad faith stuff just there, right? And it started to get me to think about this, and I started to hit this real question, right? And this is my shadow piece. This is my struggle that I struggled with for a long time, which is, why continue to work at being a good person? Why continue to work at aligning myself, healing myself, growing, doing the right thing, trying to be honest, trying to be helpful, trying to be constructive, trying to participate in a positive way, when I'm interacting with so many people who have no intention of doing the same thing, who will very readily default to their own selfishness or their own self-interest or their own distorted biases, will very quickly snap into operating in bad faith, right? Why? Why continue? Why work at waking up? Why work at growing up? Why work at healing? Why work at contributing to a world that is so filled with people who are intent on being toxic with each other? This is my real struggle. And it's still a question that moves through my head every now and then, or a feeling that moves through my heart every now and then. But I'm really turning a corner with this, and I've really come to clarity about this for myself. And I can give that clarity to you, but I don't know that's necessarily the point of the video. I'm not here trying to tell you what I went through and what my beliefs are, because my beliefs and meanings are just meaningful to me. They may not be for you, right? But this is the struggle, right? And the reason I bring this up to you is that I think this is a piece, especially if you've been through any sort of abuse, whether that's like a complex trauma situation of like low level dysfunctional relating, and being kind of like subtly or kind of semi-subtly treated improperly in a way that's wounded you over time, whether this is that you've been outright through an abusive situation of some sort, whether this is just spiritually awakening and having all this hope for humanity and hope for the world and inspiration, and then you look around and you start to see how it really is, and you start to get honest about that. Whatever kind of angle we're coming at this from, I do think inevitably we bump up against this question of, what do I do with that? What do I do with a world that mostly wants to operate in bad faith, different layers of bad faith and justification around that bad faith relating? How do I want to relate to that? Especially if you're clear about your value system, especially if you're clear that you believe in integrity or win-win scenarios or love or compassion or wisdom or transparency and honesty or being constructive and building things, co-creating with people. Like, if you believe in that kind of positive, generative mindset and worldview, you're definitely going to encounter a lot of people who will work in contrast to that, in contradiction to that, right? Even people who, quite frankly, I've seen a lot of this, for example, in the New Age community and in the spiritual community. There's a lot of people out there who even, purport to have these values, but then their behavior doesn't line up with these values, right? And to be clear, that's been me at certain points. I've fallen out of tune with these values and acted, so I get it. And there's a whole other discussion to have about that. But yeah, this is the question, right? And I think this is an important question for each of us to answer in our own hearts. How do I want to go about being a healthy, happy, good, constructive, aligned person in a world that, wants to work against that, right? And how do I tolerate that, right? So this is a deep, challenging question. Again, for some of you, this may be not where you're at yet. You may be so deep in your own personal healing process, you haven't really brought your awareness out to the world yet. And that's fine if that's where you're at. There's nothing wrong with that. But just saying, this is a feature of the landscape somewhere on the path for you, right? So let me share a little bit about this recent event I went through, because it kind of illustrates this really well. And then, and then we'll kind of unpack what it means to be a good faith person. And perhaps we'll leave the video on a more positive note here. But I want to just kind of open this question up. There are a lot of these kind of big themes, right? As we start to heal, like with some of my clients, as we're starting to heal and we're starting to like piece together, help each other. How do I put this? As I'm helping my clients heal, that's what I'm trying to say. Got a little confused for a moment there. As they're healing, there are these big themes that start to pop out about human nature, about the nature of relating, about the nature of awakening, about, again, good faith versus bad faith, all kinds of other questions like this. So there will be more of these kind of macro, big picture challenges to speak to at some point. But let me share a little bit about what happened recently, because I think it's a striking example of this, and then we'll kind of go from there. Quick note here before we dive into the story that I'm about to share. So I'm looking out a window here as I'm filming this, so I'm just getting natural lighting on me. And it just started snowing. And it's like snowing kind of hard. It's really cool to see. Anyways, just neither here nor there. Just thought I'd share. Anyways, so I had a recent experience at an Airbnb I was staying at. You may notice the background behind me is a different room than the recent videos where there's kind of a brown wall behind me, right? So I'm in a different room because something happened at that Airbnb that really illustrates this kind of bad faith thing, right? So long story short, I'm not going to give any details. I'm not going to dox anyone. I'm not going to put anyone in harm's way or get anyone in trouble here, because that's unethical to me. But long story short, the Airbnb I was staying at is owned by a person who, there were two of us staying there as guests, and there was the owner, right? The owner, apparently has a felony warrant out for their arrest, and neither of us really knew this. And around 2 a.m. in the morning, last Friday night, the police came. And the police started knocking on all the doors, banging on the doors and windows. I was sleeping at the time. I thought it was maybe someone trying to get in the Airbnb, and it wasn't my business. I didn't do anything about it. And then, they pop on the lights. They're like all parked out on the lawn in front of the house. And they, get on the loudspeaker and they say the owner's name. And they're like, there's a felony warrant for your arrest. Please come out. And the cops are there basically, and it's like one of these situations where they may very well break in, raid the house. Once I heard the voice on the loudspeaker, I woke right up, of course. I'm like, well, what do I do here, right? Because I've seen so many videos of the police, of course, breaking into a living, like a house or a living situation, and of course they have their guns out because that's a dangerous situation for them, and that's kind of when accidents can happen very easily. And so I was really scared of this, right? So I woke up, I'm like, oh geez, I'm in a situation right now where they may come breaking in, they may bust windows, there may be flashbangs, they may come in with guns looking for her. And, I'm just chilling. I'm just here as a renter in an Airbnb. And they may come in, and this could potentially be a very dangerous situation for me and for the other guest. And, I was terrified, and it was strange and it was scary. I don't want to share the rest of what happened. It's not really my place to share the rest of the story, But obviously I survived and got out of the situation. But it felt incredibly unsafe, long story short, right? Now, here's the thing. So obviously I felt unsafe the next day. The owner went somewhere else. I don't know where, but the owner disappeared. And, it's an Airbnb. I paid a lot of money prepaid as Airbnb is. And, I wanted to leave the stay because there is this threat of the police coming back looking for the owner. And so I contacted the owner to ask for, a refund and a cancellation because this is an unsafe situation, right? So just pausing right there. Okay. So there's an agreement I made both with Airbnb and with the owner, right? And the owner, I'm going there in the good faith understanding that that this is a safe place, that this is a comfortable place where I can, go about my business. That all the agreements are as stated, as said. That essentially, I'm going there under the assumption that there's no threat, of any kind, or else I wouldn't book it, right? So I'm there in good faith that this is just a normal Airbnb situation, right? The owner, is in bad faith in a couple ways. First of all, the owner, um, you know, didn't disclose that they have a warrant out for the arrest and that the police could come in any time. And this could potentially be a contentious place to be, right? The owner also didn't approve my cancellation or refund. Of course, they took off and they, are not, they're denying the incident happened. And so that's another piece of bad faith. They're denying, even though there's police documentation that it did happen, they're denying the incident happened. They are denying my, request for refund here, which is to about $800, right? Almost $800 worth of money that I should be getting back. And on top of that, so I contacted Airbnb and I've been trying to work it out and trying to get some sort of refund or some sort of, help from Airbnb, because this is incredibly, off the mark from, like, I'm sure their standards and their policies and, my expectations as a guest and all of this, right? So I'm operating as just booking a room. It should be fine, should be chill. So I'm in this crazy situation. She says no. She says it didn't happen. Airbnb also is now kind of giving me the runaround and humming and hawing about, refunding me and, and also not operating in good faith, right? I keep getting passed around to different, managers, and they're not getting back to me about, figuring this out. It's been an absolute nightmare, right? So there are these layers of bad faith here, right? There is, her not disclosing this. There's her not being willing to refund, my request. And then there's Airbnb, not taking care of it when she's out of good faith, right? Which it should be kind of their responsibility. It's their platform, right? So, they should be kind of the last, protector of the people who are using the service to be like, okay, yeah, you're in a sketchy situation. We'll take care of you, right? None of that's happened so far. So this, of course, brought up this whole question, which has been a question for me anyways, which is, how do I navigate in a good faith way when there are actors acting in a bad faith way, right? And sometimes, as I'm sure if you've ever dealt with anyone deceptive, people acting in bad faith will often use this disguise of not knowing or pretending like they don't know they're in bad faith, or they don't know they don't understand what your complaint is. There's this whole like diffusion of being accountable and being responsible or being connected to whatever your kind of concern or complaint is. That's super common for manipulative, bad faith actors, right? And so this is often what we see, right? You try to show up in good faith and someone's like, I don't know what you're talking about, or yeah, I don't know what to do about that, or yeah, I'll get back to you. And they just kind of diffuse the whole thing and kick the can down the road, right? So that's kind of what's going on. That's the story. That's the situation. And it really has illustrated this question, right? So I want to talk a little bit about what it means to be in good faith in more clarity, more detail, kind of my thoughts about this, and then we'll kind of wrap the video. Okay, so what does it mean to be a good faith person? What does it mean to be a good faith actor, right? There are so many layers to understanding good faith if you really want to think about it, because this, goes so much further than just your own integrity and your own value system. You know, as we operate in good faith, there's a set of communications that we put forth out into the world. There's a certain type of signal we send out into the world that has a certain kind of impact on others and on systems and blah blah blah, right? So this ripples out from each of us, right? But what does it mean to be good faith? I would say it means that you say what you mean and you mean what you say, right? So I would say one of the building blocks of being in good faith is that your communication is congruent and authentic and honest, right? So that you're clearly representing your internal experience outwardly to others, and you're not people pleasing, you're not placating, you're not giving false signals, you're giving real clear, accurate signals, right? So that would be one of the first ones. I would say another one is being accountable, right? So when we're in good faith, we are accountable for the moments where we are, causing harm, making a mistake, said the wrong thing, did the wrong thing, weren't in alignment with our own word, didn't follow through, et cetera, et cetera. If we in some way are not holding up our side of things and not, we're accountable for that. That's a huge part of what it means to be in good faith. So it's like when someone comes to you with a complaint or an issue or problem or like a piece of feedback, you're like, okay, I'm listening. Tell me, I want to fix it, right? Another thing that defines good faith, I think, is being self-aware and self-reflective of whether or not you are in incongruence with your own truth, your own value system, your own word, your own what you said, right? So you can't really be in good faith if you're not making an effort to be self-aware, right? So if you're just like making excuses for your behavior, not self-reflecting, not checking in, not trying to quality control and make sure you're on point, if you don't care about any of that and you're just kind of like whatever, man, I'm going to do what I do, I'm going to feel what I feel, I don't care, I'm not going to look at myself, I'm just going to go, from that kind of an attitude, generally that pulls us out of good faith, right? So part of being in good faith is like taking an attitude of self-awareness and intention towards self-awareness and really continuing to look at ourselves and be honest and be, proactive about any place where we fall out of alignment with being in good faith, right? Another one is, being responsible to our agreements, right? So if I make an agreement with someone, being responsible to it, may mean all kinds of things. That might mean, of course, just following through and honoring the agreement. That might mean if something comes up and you need to adjust the agreement or change the agreement, that you're transparent about that. If there's something, for example, small example, but a good one is you need to be somewhere on time, right? You made an agreement to meet, let's say you made an agreement to make have a fun hangout date with a friend at a coffee shop, right? There's probably an agreement of what time you're going to meet there, around what time you're going to meet. If you're running late, right? Part of what that means to be responsible to your agreements is you let that person know, hey, I'm running late. Hey, I bumped into traffic. Sorry, I woke up late, whatever it is, right? So being responsible to our agreements is part of being in good faith. I would say, in general, being good faith is a mindset of being constructive, of trying to build, right? Whether that's build relationships or build systems or build support structures or healthy things. When we are in good faith, our intent is to build in our relationships and in the world around us, right? We want to build trust. We want to build connection. We want to build, win-win situation. We want to build business. You want to build community, whatever it is. When we're in good faith, that's more the mindset rather than I want to take or I want to tear down or I want to transform and change. There are other mindsets that aren't necessarily congruent with a good faith kind of attitude. Debatable. I do think that's debatable, but generally speaking, I would say being win-win, just like being constructive, being win-win. I would say being honest, being sincere, being clear. This is one of the big ones I see, right? Is in the world around us, So many people really like to put up the pretense of honesty while actually not being very honest either with each other or with themselves. A lot of people put up the pretense of like wanting to be like this, like, upstanding person, but they lack clarity about themselves, right? Often, this question of sincerity is an interesting one because it's kind of in vogue in our society now to be jaded and insincere and bitter and dark and black pilled and pessimistic. And, I think that really started with like Gen X, and Gen X, my generation kind of rode with that and was really like, yeah, it's cool to be insincere and ironic and snarky. I think that really spilled over into the millennial generation. I think millennials had a real thing of, snark and irony and insincerity, right? And then I think we see that now with Gen Z too. Although I think in their own way, Gen Z is actually probably more sincere. It's just that, they're being sincere about growing up in a pretty dysfunctional world, which I think is kind of fair play, honestly. Um, but there's a sincerity, there's an honesty, there is a clarity and a truthfulness, right? And this is an interesting thing because when we're being honest, when we're being sincere, it can seem like we are making ourselves vulnerable to manipulation, right? It can seem like that is naive, right? To be sincere, to be honest, is to be naive because then you're handing people exactly what's going on with you while they're keeping their cards close to their chest, and then they can kind of play you and work your sincerity, right? Pretend to be sincere back. And to some degree, there's truth in that. That can happen. But I don't think it's necessarily one-to-one accurate that, honesty and sincerity means vulnerability and kind of, being a rube. I think it can mean just, you're open, but you can also be mindful of other people trying to take advantage of you or being insincere themselves. And you can hold standards about that. You can not interact with people who are insincere. You can name their insincerity, or name your feeling of skepticism or noticing that something is, not quite congruent on their side of things, right? I mean, that's all fair game. So there are ways to be powerful and sincere, right? Versus disempowered by your sincerity. I would also say to be good faith is to be not exploitative, right? To really honor other people's needs, boundaries, limits, shortcomings, and to work with that rather than capitalize on any of that, right? To not be a taker, right, is part of being in good faith, or at least to not take without an agreement that they want to give and that there's a clear, conscious, exchange happening, right? So you can have a good faith exchange where you're the receiver, but what I mean is to not just be a covert taker, right? And I would say the other thing here with being good faith is being transparent, being open and honest about where you're at, what your needs are, what your thoughts are, what your impressions are, what your agenda is, all of that, right? And that again can seem naive and silly and foolish in a world full of deceptive, actors. But the truth is, often when we're transparent, it calls others into transparency, and you're really like declaring that you're really, in congruence with whatever it is you want or whatever your intention is, right? So this is kind of what I think it means to be in good faith. You do what you say, you mean what you say, you're honest, you're open, you're transparent, you're sincere, you're thinking win-win, you're thinking building, constructive, generating, et cetera, et cetera. Mindful of other people's experience and needs. I think all of that is part of being a good faith person, right? So to this question, and then we'll kind of, I guess, wrap the video here, because again, I'm sure this is long at this point. What do we do, right, to when we're interacting with people who are operating in bad faith, right? How do we navigate this? I would say the first thing that we need is to make sure that we are well resourced in ourselves, right? It's hardest to be in good faith when we are in a dependent, needy mode where we are not resourced, whether that's emotionally resourced and kind of internally resourced in terms of, sense of connection and self-love and self-validation and self-respect, these kinds of things, or whether that's in terms of needing something from the outside that we don't have for ourselves, right? For example, if I really need money and I am going to an employer and the employer operates in bad faith and I'm operating in good faith, trying to be a good employee, but the employer is trying to take advantage of my hours or my scheduling or what have you, right? Classic example, honestly. Um, you know, it gets harder to tolerate that and stay in good faith, right? So I would say first step is we want to make sure we're well resourced, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, materially, socially, um, in order to operate in good faith comfortably, right? The next thing I think is that we also want to be really attuned and aware of others' incongruencies or others' incentives to be covertly, in bad faith, right? And aware of that possibility without being paranoid, right? So just being mindful that other people can operate in bad faith or that someone might operate in bad faith, and to be kind of watching for that and, factoring that into the equation in a way that it's not about being paranoid. It's not about being, overly afraid or overly worried about it. It's about being aware and having some boundaries to protect yourself so that if you see someone operating in bad faith, you either can name it and address it and call them into, a better way of relating with you, or you can have some boundaries and kind of unplug from that situation if you need to. There are a lot of different ways we can go with a bad faith actor without, getting in a conflict and kind of sinking to their level and tit for tat and retaliation and revenge and all that. No, it's gross. There are ways to hold your integrity as a constructive person in a world with people who are trying to be destructive towards you, right? And a lot of that involves boundaries. And the boundaries involve really seeing and being aware of that first, right? So that would be the second thing I'd say. I would say absolutely you need to be resourced as resourced as possible is really going to make a big thing. And then you need boundaries, including awareness boundaries, situational, attentional boundaries, to be aware of people who are acting in bad faith, right? I'd say the third thing from there is maybe some negotiation skills, the ability to relate and work with, because sometimes when a person's acting in bad faith, they don't totally mean to, or they don't know they're doing it. It can be unconscious, it can be habitual. And sometimes if you name it, or if you can kind of ally with what they need that they're trying to like covertly get, you might be able to create a win-win, with a somewhat, questionable relational dynamic, right? I'm not saying that's always the way to go or that that's always healthy, but I also don't think it's totally pragmatic to 100% only interact with people of high integrity and in good faith who are constructive and looking out for the best for you. I would love that. I'd love to live in that kind of world. I just don't think that's realistic for where we are right now. So the other part of that, I think, is that you can, probably start to learn how to, work with less, people with less integrity, or who are operating in bad faith, in a place of, being attuned to what they need or what they want, what their drives are, kind of speaking their language, and incorporating that into your agreements, right? So the other thing is, I would encourage you as much as you can, though, to be in community, be in connection with people who are safe, who are constructive, who are healthy, who are in good faith, and get a real feel for what that's like, so that, again, that would be part of resourcing yourself, is that you have these connections around you that bolster that sense for you. That's about what I've got on this for now. This is a really deep topic, and in a lot of ways, this is really fundamentally the whole point of me bringing up this thing and talking about this and sharing this with you, is just to raise the awareness, to create the language and the set of understandings in your attention of the reality that there are good faith and bad faith actors and interactions. And these are very different mindsets, very different intentions. They show up in different ways. And that part of being a healthy person is operating in good faith. I strongly believe that. I don't think you can really get to deep well-being and deep self-actualization without being in good faith. But we are swimming in the oceans of bad faith all around us. I think that's sad and unfortunate, but I do think that's fairly accurate. Um, and so this question is here. This is one of the pieces of the path, right? And I'm sure this, of course, evokes different, religious themes, whether we're looking at the Buddha, and different forms of temptation the Buddha went through on his path to enlightenment, or obviously the story of Christ and, temptations there, and the kind of, all the deceptions there. There are a lot of great examples, archetypally and historically, that kind of point to this being part of a feature of the world. So I just want to kind of name it, want to make a video about it. Again, partially to get this off my chest and kind of share, this struggle of my own in this recent event, but also to get you to start seeing this as a question to consider. And, what I guess what I'll leave you with here as a last thought is, in my experience, being a good faith person around wounded, toxic people is hard. It can be painful. It can be discouraging. It can be frustrating. But the payoff of living in good faith and being a constructive, healthy person is so worth it, both in the short term, immediate, in terms of how you feel in your own skin, also in the long term, in terms of impacts and implications and your role in the world around you. And the more we engage in a culture of other good faith people, and the more good faith people are self-aware and interconnected with each other and building a culture of good faith, or restoring a culture of good faith, depending on, your view on it, I'd say that's the work. And I'd say that's worth it. And I would say, even if it's painful, even if it's hard, even if there are lots of moments that can kind of black pill you and be bitter in terms of dealing with unhealthy, toxic, covert, manipulative people, there's a larger win here in being a good faith person. So that's the thought I want to leave you with for now. And, please, I'm terrible at being a YouTuber and driving traffic. I just want to connect with you guys and give you good content. So if you could do all the things for the video to help it grow, help the channel grow, help the visibility grow, thumbs up, comment down below if something resonates here. If this is the first time you're seeing the video, consider liking, subscribing. I do a fair amount of this long form content, and trying to get more short form content in there too. Lots of content about this kind of stuff. Much love to you all. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate you all. And yeah, that's it for now. I'll see you guys soon. Take care.